Okay, so I'm going to get into the collaborative story that has all of my characters in it. And excuse me if it makes no sense. I'm going to try my best. I tried yesterday and it ended up really crazy. So, my story is split into two sort of dimensional type things. Paige and Spore, the older versions, are from one dimension because I did really want to be able to incorporate all of my dolls at the same time in one story. Even though they're an older and a younger version, they're all in it. So, Paige and Spore are from one dimension. And in that dimension also exists a Maddie. Maddie's research as a scientist, as she went through high school, this is backstory here, she had a theory about dimensions, and her theory was that many dimensions existed, and a version of yourself exists across all of the dimensions. So Maddie believed that there was a Maddie across all these different dimensions who in essence was the same sort of person, but different circumstances could vary their personality and how they presented themselves. But in essence, there would be a similar person across every dimension. And she wanted to prove this, so she created a dimension crossing machine with her child genius skills. And she decided to get Spore to operate the machine for her, so she could cross dimensions. Well, as I explained to you before, Spore is not the most smart and best choice, and he messed up and broke her machine, so she got stuck in another dimension. And so Spore and Paige grew up, these two, and continued to try to fix this machine. Spore was very adamant in trying to fix the machine because he had a very close bond with Maddie as a child. They grew up together, going to the same school, living down the street from one another. So he had a very close bond with her, and he wanted to fix the machine to get her back, obviously. So over time, he was always over at their place, and as a child, he drove Paige nuts because he was always like so ridiculously dumb, I should say. So after Maddie disappeared, he and Paige ended up hooking up because she kind of grew close to him over time. So their relationship is one of a couple. And in my story, Spore eventually is able to fix the machine. So he and Paige grow up. They're in their 20s now, so that's these characters that are depicted here. They're in their 20s. And Spore just finally figures out how to fix the machine. So after about, I don't know, I say my story would be like, at the end of high school was when Maddie would disappear, and then these two grew into their 20s. They finally fixed the machine, so Spore is able to cross dimensions back and forth, and the dimension that he ends up in is one where these three characters exist. So in that dimension that Maddie created the machine that can send them to, himself and Nora and Maddie, because Paige goes by Paige in this dimension, but she goes by Nora in this one, they're all still in high school in that dimension. So he crosses and is trying to find clues by staying close to Maddie and Spencer and Nora. He's trying to find clues to find his Maddie, who is nowhere to be found, but he's adamant that she must be around somewhere, and he's not sure in what sort of a state she'll be. So that's kind of the general premise of the beginning of the story. And within the story comes a whole bunch of other little stories, funny instances with Spore meeting himself, but obviously because Spencer is so dim-witted, he doesn't realize. And then this version of Maddie starts to catch on that these two are older versions of her friends. and wacky antics occur that are unspecific and sort of float around in my head. But another plot point I thought I would mention is that Spore particularly has a really strong connection to all these other versions of himself across the dimensions, and this is why he kind of helped Maddie to develop her theory originally, because he has very vivid dreams of himself across the dimensions. And that's where my Spore stories come in, because I wanted to somehow connect them to my large story, all these other little disjointed stories that I write about Spore. And the way that they kind of happen is that he dreams of them, and he knows that they're part of another reality somewhere. And over the course of my story, Spore kind of starts to lose a little bit of touch with reality. He starts thinking that these other versions of Spore are himself, or he's not sure what's a dream, what's not. So that's another sort of dicey part of my story. So yeah, I'm not going to give away the conclusion, because the conclusion constantly is changing. Does Spore find Maddie? I'll leave it up to you to think about. But I thought that this would just give you a little bit more information about my characters and kind of the larger story they're a part of. It's very manga-esque, I believe. Very shoujo manga-esque, with like the relationships and kind of the romances. Another thing that happens in the story is that Spore becomes a substitute psychologist at the school that Spencer, Maddie, and Paige go to. Or sorry, Nora. Spencer, Maddie, and Nora. Paige, Nora. That they go to, and so Spore gives love advice to his younger self, Spencer, about his relationship with Maddie. So it's kind of another little silly thing that happens, because obviously Spore is not qualified to be a psychologist whatsoever, so he gives out some wacky advice. So yeah, that's all I'm going to say for real this time. I hope that that made sense to you. Let me know what you think. If you think that's a cool story or not. If you don't, that's okay. That's what it is. It is what it is. So maybe one day it'll come out of my head. Maybe not. I started to try to write it down, and I got a little bit of an intro in, and then I just gave up. I used to be more of a writer, but you know, things change, and the story exists in my head. So yeah, I hope that gave you a bit better idea about my characters and a bit more understanding of them, and I hope you like them. So yeah, leave me a comment, subscribe, whatever you want to do. I'll talk to you guys later. Bye bye.